Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. How's it going? We are still continuing with History of Horror. We are going back. Now that we are past the 80s, we can go to Danse Macabre, the original Danse Macabre. The bulk of the book, not just the essay "What's Scary" at the end, at the beginning of the book, but as a complement to the book. I'm in the original. I have the other version in audiobook, as I've mentioned before. So we're into the 70s, or we're back to the 70s. Did 2010s, then the 2000s, 90s, 80s last time, and now we're back to the 70s. I'm still going to be using Josh Howard's video, this one here at the bottom, of course, as a framework for a lot of the stuff, because he does go over some of the stuff that King doesn't, and I appreciate that, and I do need all the history of horror help I can get, even though I don't think it's a great video, but, you know, that same could be said about mine, so let's not really go into it too much. Josh Howard, since we have him up, he divides 70s, crazy 70s, into Italian neorealism, such as Cannibal Holocaust, and then the American side, demonic films continue, such as The Exorcist, and the slasher films debut. And then he says they don't even really debut because they debuted earlier on, because, you know, what's Psycho if not a slasher? What's I actually thought of another one today, but of course I can't think of it now. Anything? Nope. No. But slashers being slashers, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface, or Michael Myers, Halloween, and et al. Of course, when we have Stephen King going, he's going to mention a whole lot more different things going on in this time. Trends, I guess. He's talking about, I don't want to say What's Scary, because that's the name of his essay, and that's just confusing. He's talking about how horror movies are broken up. That's not a helpful page. This is a helpful page. There we go. He's very broad in his horror movies as well. Oh, and we get to go into Stephen King's talking about TV shows. From Stephen King's talking about TV shows, I did research on. I was IMDBing. It's a verb. The shows he talked about to see what years they were in. So I'll talk about the 60s ones in the 60s video next time, and the 70s one in this video. And apparently the 70s ones have all been remade into 2000s ones, like Kolchak the Night Stalker. I didn't know that was remade. Apparently Dark Shadows, which is a Kolchak, same producer type guy, has been remade. So King goes over Kolchak. He enjoyed some of them. They started off good, but then again, you keep a TV series going for too long, it's going to turn into crap. Part of the reason I don't watch television. I miss a lot, but you know what? That's fine. But Stephen King's going to break horror movies down further into just demonic films, slasher films, and Italian neorealism, which of course is the sort of documentary style that's going to influence Blair Witch down the line, and then I don't know if they were influenced, how much they were influenced by Italian neorealism as a school. But it's the same sort of filmography style. It's not my area of expertise at all, so I'm going to skip it as much as possible. Let's see, I got my hot water boiling, actually. Oh, it's really warm. It's a little painful, but that's fine. Stephen King's talking about different things, not just religious, demonic possession type things, or slashers. He goes more in depth. He talks about social political movies. In the 70s, social political movies would be like The Exorcist, focusing on Regan, the little girl in The Exorcist who's possessed. Sort of a juvenile delinquency gone mad. So in the 70s, there's still fear of juvenile delinquency run amok. So I was like, how bad can you get? Well, here's The Exorcist for you. This is worse than it could get. The Brood by Cronenberg, which King calls this horror movie of the disintegration of the generational family. Isn't that a fancy term? I don't know. It's a little bit. Stephen King says these things are subtext, and they are. It's subtext that an average moviegoer can watch the movie and not pick up on at all, because the disintegration of the generational family. That's when I'm going into a horror movie, I'm not thinking too much about it. Amityville Horror, he talks about a lot. He talks that equates that to a financial horror. He has nice little anecdotes about someone watching the Amityville Horror attracted older couples. Older, not your 17, 16, 15-year-old typical horror movie kids who go see horror movies. It attracted 30s and 40s, etc. Because when stuff kept going on with the house, there's bills to be paid with it. So it's sort of a financial horror thing. Stephen King makes a point of saying that he overheard a lady turn to her friend or husband or whatever and say, "Oh, think of the bills." And then in the movie itself, did I mention this in the remakes? Because I think this was definitely remade in the 2000s. And in the movie itself, there was money issues as well. They only find a band of $100 bills, which like $1,000 goes missing. So that would be a financial horror movies. There's eco-disaster survival movies. This is King quoting Castle Frankenstein for Phase 4. And Prophecy would be another, the 70s Prophecy, not the Christopher Walken Prophecy. Eco-disaster, techno horror. He doesn't come up with techno horror, but technology run amok in the worst possible way. Techno horror, leading to pollution, leading to abnormal wildlife in the Prophecy. He also talks about that one. His movie is junk food because it may fail in all social political things, and horror movies. You don't go watch a lot of horror movies unless you have a good taste for junk food, because you see a lot of crap, and you got to learn to enjoy the crap. The crap is tasty. There's nothing to it. Empty calories, I suppose, is the analogy. A lot of horror movies are just empty calories. They're not good for anything, but they're good. They're tasty. Duel, 1971. That's Steven Spielberg's made-for-TV movie about where the truck is the monster. In Duel, there was a trucker who was really the monster and causing the havoc, but you never see the trucker. You just see the truck. The Car, 1977. I guess is a precursor to Christine. So the Car is the villain, the monster. There's social horror. Stepford Wives in 1975. Women's Lib is the women's liberation is the underlying social thing going on that we're thinking about there. Carrie, actually, talking about Stephen King himself, the Brian De Palma 76 movie, and the book itself, too. King's very humble when talking about his books versus his movies. He doesn't mention any of his books at all, except to be self-deprecating about them, which is kind of crap. He's a very good author. Everybody knows this. But anyway, social horror as well. Anyone who's seen or read Carrie knows about the social implications of what's going on in Carrie. King talks about it as women's path to power. Women finding their own path to power. And Dawn of the Dead was mentioned in this section, but I think it was in contrast to something else. Oh, but he does talk about it in What's Scary. Dawn of the Dead would be a critique. Subtext. It's subtext. The subtext is a critique of consumerism, rampant consumerism. It's also a movie about zombies. Actually, I think King makes a point of saying, on one level, one of the movies he describes was... Which one was it? Does it have it on here? On one level, X movie, whatever it is about promiscuity, I think it was. And on another level, it's how would you like a giant leech to jump out of the mail slot and attach to your face? Those levels aren't working on the same... they're working at the same time, but, they're not... There's more attention going to the second than to the former. Alright. So that's some of the TV shows, and that's King's talking about the different sections of horror. Not saying that those... Techno horror obviously came out earlier, and social political horror came out earlier as well. This isn't something that was birthed in the 70s or died in the 70s. It's just that now that I'm in King's book, I should talk about it. And he has examples for me, and it's easier to illustrate the point when you have examples at your hand. Another political one. He mentions Omega Man. Charlton Heston. It's the I Am Legend, the second iteration, the second movie version of I Am Legend, which had the vampires, the bad monsters, essentially dressed up like Gestapo. So there was a political aspect to that in our brains, in the back of our heads. Said, okay, the vampires in the book, I'm not saying they're benign. A group of them were not benign. What's the right word? It's an interesting book. But the second movie, I think I liked the second movie least. Will Smith's version wasn't great, but it had some pathos. I didn't feel that with the second movie. The Vincent Price movie was the best version thus far. Still not as good as the book, but not bad. I don't know. Did I get all of them for the 70s? I think I did. Oh, well, there's the mythic fairy tale horror, which is the other big chunk section that he talks about. And he talks about 20 movies in particular. He gives you a quiz. I should have page numbers, of course, but I'm in the British version, so my page numbers don't match anybody else's page numbers anyway, more than likely, especially if you have this version. Click. There we go. Where was I at? Oh, here we go. Yeah, so the test. He gives you 70. He gives you 20 questions, 20 prompts, and you have to name the movie. And of course, some of them are dated now because it's 2013, and he wrote this in 81. Probably wrote it in 80, and some of them are from his childhood, so we're talking late 50s, early 60s. Yeah, late 50s, early 60s. So, I don't know. Oh, I was going to give you a page number. Page number is 210. For the that's the answers. Don't go to the answers first. 207. Questions start on 207. I cheated and went to the answers, but I've read the book 4 times, so whatever. In this, there's a fairy tale aspect to some of these stories, and I disagree with some of them because, really, that's a fairy tale? That's a stretch, and it is a stretch. And some of these are a stretch to be horror at all, as he has Deliverance on the list, and he has Looking for Mr. Goodbar on the list. Suspense. He has Wait Until Dark, which I guess I can't talk about now because it's in the 60s. Midnight Express, which I don't really, not exactly horror. It's about imprisonment and socially stuff. I think that would be more social myself, but what do I know? But some of the ones that he did have, Coma, was 1978. Not one I'm really familiar with, but it's about people being, a bad mix of anesthetic, so they go into comas instead of getting knocked out for surgery. Alien, which was 1979. Pardon me. It's a Lovecraftian in Lovecraft in space is what King described it as, and that's pretty much it. It's Ridley Scott. It's what's her name? Oh my god, I'm so stupid. Anyway, I'm just gonna ignore it. I didn't say that. What? Huh? Yes, and she is great. Nope, not gonna think of it. Oh well. I'll think of it in 5 minutes and shout it out and be all embarrassed. You guys are yelling at me now. Night Watch, 1973. I don't know the movie. How did he describe it? 207. Oh, that's the Elizabeth Taylor one that I was looking up. I think. American woman goes to London, suffering from a breakdown, and sees a murder in a boarded-up building across the road. Again, that's kind of a stretch for horror, and it's kind of a stretch for as fairy tale. And then Deliverance, and then The Omen, which is, of course, I'm thinking of the remake. Of course, it's on the remake list. I think it came out early 2000s. Would be the remakes. Is it on this list? I don't think it is. It was not. He had a neat little. His appendixes are good. I'm very glad that he had good appendixes, because on page 463, Appendix 1, he goes over the films he talks about for 3 pages. And in Appendix 2, which is in 466, he talks about the books he went over for 3 pages. And then he goes into the index. That's helpful. That's very helpful. I did find a lot of spelling errors from when I was Wikipediaing them. But, you know, he might have had someone else do the appendices. Appendix are kind of tough to do anyway. So, and before the time of computers, he was doing it, typing it out on a typewriter. We'll try to be as forgiving as possible. Aren't we generous? All right. So the Omen, of course, was the spawn of Satan. Growing up, the mom and dad try to kill him. Doesn't work. Damien stuff. Right. And then Deliverance was his last one he talks about. Which again, if it was horror, I would call it social horror. Or maybe just slashery. I don't know. But mythic? Fairy tale horror? I don't know. He confuses me in this section a bit. I'm not going to lie. Some of them make more sense later on. Oh, and Halloween, 78. Which is, of course, Mike Myers escaped from a mental home on Halloween, starts hunting babysitters. Rightio. Okay, so that, of course, didn't start in the 70s either. The fairy tale type setup of a horror story goes back to, goodness, even the earliest one on here is mid-50s. There's Bad Seed, I Bury the Living, Macabre, and I'm sure it goes back further than that. And this is also subtext. It's got to be, because I don't pick up on a lot of these myself easily. I sort of get the gist on some of them, like Stepford Wives and Carrie. I get the gist. Prophecy, with the pollution causing gigantic giganticism in animals. Amityville Horror even is financial. I get it as subtext. This one I don't even get as subtext. Some of these are just confusing. Nonetheless, we shall crack on, shall we? Before I get to books, I'm going to continue with movies. I'll talk about what he's talking about with the 70s. He's going to talk about The Exorcist basically with demonic films continued from Rosemary's Baby and whatever in the 60s, and then slasher debuts, which is of course, as I said before, Halloween. Black Christmas was the 70s. Oh, almost spilled my hot water. Watch out. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is 74, Black Christmas is 74, Halloween is 78. What do we have here? I guess you would call The Brood as demonic. I don't know what you would call the continuation of the zombie stuff from earlier. Oh, I didn't mention Jaws. Jaws, 70s. Jaws 2, 70s for that matter. Julie Christie carries the demon seed. I'm flipping through these. On IMDb, there's these groups, these lists of best horror movies of the 70s, best horror movies of the 80s. I've been going over these trying to find stuff. Burnt Offerings I do want to talk about. I think that's on the list too. Some of these are not. Some of these don't deserve to be. Oh, The Blood Spattered Bride should be on the list, I guess. That was a remake of Carmilla, or Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, which was, as I mentioned in the Vampire series, influential on Dracula. I don't know the movie very well, so I don't know how well of a adaptation it is. Last House on the Left, the first one, the one that Stephen King hated, but that was in the section, in the 80s, 70s rather. Andromeda Strain, Island of Dr. Moreau. Some of these are really weird. The second version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. These are not horror movies. Oh, the last Alfred Hitchcock movie was in the 70s. Because he died in 1980, I believe. So, play Misty for me for slasher-e-ness. Martin, which is a cross between a vampire and a serial killer. Oh my. Oh, The Crazies. I didn't mention The Crazies in the remake version, but the original Crazies by Romero was in the 70s as well. And of course, see, they call this Deliverance a horror movie too. Not what I would call a horror movie, but Phantasm is another one that King does not talk about. And most people who think about 70s movies for a while think of Phantasm pretty soon. But King doesn't mention it. Texas Chainsaw, and yeah, let's get rid of that one. Jeez. Nosferatu the Vampire is one I just heard of today. Werner Herzog. That's not the original Nosferatu. It's another one. German Expressionist Cinema. You have some Hammerish films. During the 70s, they're wrapping up their things. Dracula. Oh, Willard is also in this section for those of you who really want a Rat Swarm movie. It was also remade in the 2000s, because everything seemed to be remade in the 2000s. That's something, actually, that Josh Howard got right. Cat of Nine Tails. Let's Scare Jessica to Death is one that's mentioned twice. I don't know. I know the movie, but I don't know the movie. Some of these are really weird. Wicker Man. Oh, he does mention that one. Yeah, I think I'm going to skip right to King now. I don't think anything that is on the list that King doesn't talk about is worth talking about. Because I think... Yeah, I'm calling it. This one's done. And that one's done. Andy Warhol's Blood of Dracula. That one was worth mentioning just because it sounded so weird. Oh, and The Legend of Hell House, which is a Matheson make. Alright, so 70s movies that King was talking about. I may as well go through them. I'm just going to go through them quick, because I'm not familiar with a lot of these. The Abominable Dr. Phibes, directed by Robert Fust, 1971. Alien, I mentioned, Ridley Scott. Oh, I'm still not thinking of her name. Oh, and I just closed out IMDb too. Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Oh, that's so frustrating. Asylum by Roy Ward Baker, 1972. The Brood, David Cronenberg, we mentioned. It's the one about the woman birthing babies that kill her family. I don't think I mentioned the plot of it. It was the one that's the disintegration of the generational family on one level, and on the other level is about a woman birthing babies that kill the family. Burnt Offerings, Dan Curtis, which is based on Marasco, Robert Marasco's book, also from the 70s, I believe. Yeah, it counts. Carrie, Brian De Palma. It's based on the King book. Very good. 1976. I heard the rumor, I'm almost positive it's true, that the final scene in Carrie was so creepy because it was filmed with her walking backwards and then filmed in reverse, or projected in reverse. I'm not sure how. My technical knowledge of filmmaking is very slight, as you can probably tell. It was filmed in reverse, so she was walking backwards towards the house, so it looked like she was walking towards the house, and then Carrie's hand. Yeah, you know. The jump at the end. But she was walking backwards. So it seemed, and when you film it and when you project it forwards, so looks like she's walking forwards, it looks weird because when you're walking backwards, you don't walk the same way as when you're walking forwards. So it seemed stilted and dreamlike. Anyway, fact for the day, if it is true, I think it is. I think it was a reputable source I heard it from. It wasn't just one of those things that you hear from people. George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, 1979, sequel to Night of the Living. The rampant consumerism that King talks about in What's Scary. That wasn't in the 2004 version. Oh yes, I was going to go through these quicker, wasn't I? Dario Argento makes his appearance in the 70s. Deep Red in 1975. Deliverance in 1972 was on his list. Horror movie? I don't know. Anyway, of course, Argento's a big one. So, John Boorman is the director of Deliverance. I'm not really familiar with his work. Don't Look Now, Nicholas Roeg, 1973. No idea. The Duel, Steven Spielberg. It's the best made-for-TV movie in Stephen King's opinion. 1971. Eraserhead, David Lynch, 1978. William Friedkin's Exorcist, of course, 1973. That's pretty much one on all the lists. The Frenzy, Alfred Hitchcock, his last movie, or his second to last movie. The Fury, Brian De Palma, the guy exploding at the end. Cassavetes? Is that John Cassavetes? I think so. Halloween by John Carpenter, 1978. House That Dripped Blood by Peter Duffel, 1970. No idea. The title like that, how can you go wrong? Jaws, Steven Spielberg, 75. Of course, it's a great one. Let's Scare Jessica to Death, John Hancock, 1971. One I'm not familiar with. Martin, that's a Romero. That's a vampire story / serial killer story, because you don't know if he's a vampire or he's just a guy who's cutting people and drinking their blood and killing them. But he does have flashbacks or delusions that he was alive 100 years ago. But then he was tricked in by his family. I don't know. In Romero's eyes, who also plays a priest in this? In Romero's eyes, he's not a vampire. There's no supernatural element. So in Romero's eyes, if you take Noel Carroll's version of The Fantastic, this isn't a horror movie at all. But it is. Picnic at Hanging Rock by Peter Weir, 1978. I have no idea what it's about. Rabid by Cronenberg, 1976. Race with the Devil, Jack Starrett, 1975. Neither. Sorry. Rituals by somebody, because King doesn't know, or didn't know in 1978. He didn't know when he wrote the book. And I didn't think to look it up. Sorry, King. Salem's Lot, King adaptation by Tobe Hooper, 79. That's the one where he looks like Nosferatu. Oh yeah. Apparently, the guy who played Barlow was mentioned earlier today when he was talking about Thriller. The Boris Karloff television show that was one of the best horror ones. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Seizure, Oliver Stone, 1975. I'm not familiar with this one at all. Oliver Stone's a pretty big name. Sisters, Brian De Palma, 1973. The Shout, Jerry Skolimowski, 1979. Someone's Watching Me, John Carpenter, 1978. The Stepford Wives, by Brian Forbes, 1975. Suspiria, Dario Argento again, 1977. Is that? Yeah, that would be the early. Nope, the second earliest. Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre original, 1974. I didn't even have to look at that one. I knew that one. I have it memorized now. How many times have I said 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre? They Came From Within, Cronenberg, 1975. Trilogy of Terror, Dan Curtis, 1975. When Michael Calls, no idea. Philip Leacock is the director, 1971. The Wicker Man, also remade with, was it Nicolas Cage in the remake? Alright, Nicolas Cage I think was in the remake. 1973, it was directed by Robin Hardy. That's social horror, I would say. Religious horror. Willard Daniel Mann is the director, 1971. Right, so stuff. That's going to be the movies. I'm not going to go over. I mean, the books are pretty close type. And some of these books I don't consider horror, like Watership Down. The Plague Dogs is not necessarily really horror either. I don't know, it's kind of odd. But Ramsey Campbell, which he does talk about, British horror writer, he talks about The Doll Who Ate Its Mother and The Parasite briefly. No, I'm getting mixed up with another one now. Doll Who Ate Its Mother was a ghoul in Liverpool eating dead people or dead body parts, limbs, stuff. The Thomas Covenant trilogy, 77 through 83, the first 3 volumes, apparently it's still ongoing, by Donaldson. Harlan Ellison, he talks about some of these in Strange Wine, like Hitler Painted Roses and notes. Come on, where are my notes? Croatan. James Herbert, The Fog. He talks about in 75. He recommends The Spear, and he talks about he mentions The Survivor. William Hortzberg, Falling Angel, I've never heard of. Dr. Rat by Kotzwinkle, I've never heard of. 78 and 76, respectively. Fritz Lieber, Our Lady of Darkness, 77. Never heard of it. But it's giving me... this is going to be my shopping list next time I go to the bookstore. It's like, wow, can I find... or Amazon or whatever. Can I find some of these... or can I find some of these on audiobook? Save me awesome stuff. Anyway, Richard Matheson's on here a bunch. Hell House, the movie was in the 70s as well. I don't remember what date I said, or if I did say. Then earlier stuff that we're going to talk about. And we're going to go back to Richard Matheson, because Richard Matheson's the man. Joyce Carol Oates, Nightside. I'm not familiar with this one. And Oates is another big author. Flannery, that's 50s. Oh, Ira 11, Stepford Wives, and Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby was in the 60s, Stepford Wives was in the 70s. We talked about the movie. It's the women's liberation, men fighting back and reprogramming or replacing their wives with robots with breasts. Joan Samson the Auctioneer. I couldn't even find this one on Wikipedia, but apparently it's 1975, according to Google search. But it didn't even come up on Wikipedia, so that's going to be an odd one. Anne Rivers Siddons, The House Next Door. I talked about this in the ghost section because King talks about this heavily in the ghost section. It's a haunted house. It's a modern haunted house. Modern haunted house. I can talk. Where the people in the house next door to the house next door to them is the haunted one. Watch families get destroyed and have to fight the haunted house. Right. Anne Rivers Siddons, of course, she's gone on to do... I hate using the word chick lit, but books that my mom would read. Yeah. Yeah. More ghosty stuff. Peter Straub. He's pretty much king of ghosts. If you're not a big... I like Stephen King's ghosts. I don't like any ghosts. I try to avoid the genre in general. I did talk about Peter Straub's ghost story and Julia. And If You Can See Me Now is another one he mentions. And Shadowland, which is 80, so it doesn't really count in this section. Thomas Tryon, The Other. This was tough to find because apparently there was 12 Thomas Tryons. One's an architect, one was living in the 1600s and wrote self-help and vegetarian books, And the other one's an actor, but he actually happened to be a writer as well. Thomas Williams, the book called Tsuga's Children, Tsugas Children, apostrophe S Children rather. No idea. T.M. Wright, Strange Seed, no idea. And there might be other ones, but those are ones with stars next to, and that's he feels are particularly important if he puts a star next to them. So if the authors didn't have a star next to them, I didn't really go through the trouble of trying to find the dates for their books, because that's, it's a bit of work. It's research time. I didn't say Herbert, did I? Does he write stuff in the 60s, or did he get it? I missed the Herbert. James Herbert, The Fog and the Spear, and The Survivor, all in the 70s. A fog comes in from government messing with stuff they shouldn't mess with, and makes everybody suicidal or homicidal or both. In his list of books, they talks about in detail. House Next Door, Ghost Story, and Julia are the ones we talked about. The rest of them are earlier, besides short stories. Ramsey Campbell, James Herbert. I can't talk today. And Harlan Ellison. Hitler Painted Roses was... I didn't mention it. I mentioned it, but I didn't talk about it. Hitler Painted Roses was the... No, that's really difficult to explain. It's a weird heaven and hell thing. Hitler is in hell painting roses. A woman escapes from hell because she's been unjustly sentenced there. Goes up to heaven to find the guy who really committed the murders that she's being accused of, who's sitting in a hot tub or whatever. And stuff happens, and God escorting her back to hell, saying, "Sorry, I don't care that you're falsely accused or whatever." Sees these beautiful roses painted by Hitler and is raving about them, and say they're wonderful. Weird, but it's Harlan Ellison, so I'm sure we'll talk about Harlan Ellison some more. He's written for lots of things. I suppose we will. I think he did start before the 70s. The Croatan one was a guy kept flushing a bunch of aborted fetuses down the toilet, and then somehow gets trapped in the sewers, and all his babies are there. All the children that he sired and then aborted. That's kind of wicked, kind of weird, and wonderful if you're a horror fan. I think I'm going to call it there, folks. 70s. We're in waist deep in Danse Macabre. I can get it without covering the title. There we go. And we're going to wade deeper into the 60s next time. This is, of course, Josh Howard's one. Armageddon and religious horror for movies. Psycho came out in the early 60s. Night of the Living Dead came out in the late 60s. The Production Code of America ended in 1964, which allowed more graphicness. I'm going to try to put at the bottom there, you'll see 14 minutes. I'm going to try to put the times of the video in there. So, more Danse Macabre next time with History of Horror with me, Drew. Alright. Yeah, that's 50 minutes. That's a pretty long one. That's good. I'm going to finish my water. I think I deserve a cup of ice cream, I think. That's my post-video treat today. Ice cream. Because I finished today's horror analysis. I'll talk to you. See you next time, folks. Have a great night. Not really go into it too much. Josh Howard, since we have him up, he divides 70s, crazy 70s, into Italian neorealism, such as Cannibal Holocaust, and then the American side, demonic films continue, such as The Exorcist, and the slasher films debut. And then he says they don't even really debut because they debuted earlier on. Because what's Psycho if not a slasher? What's I actually thought of another one today, but of course I can't think of it now. Anything? Nope. No. But slashers being slashers like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface, or Michael Myers, Halloween, and et al. Of course, when we have Stephen King going, he's going to mention a whole lot more different things going on in this time. Trends. A TV series going for too long, it's going to turn into crap. Part of the reason I don't watch television. I miss a lot, but you know what? That's fine. But Stephen King's going to break horror movies down further into just demonic films, slasher films, and Italian neorealism, which of course is the sort of documentary style that's going to influence Blair Witch down the line. And then I don't know if they were influenced, how much they were influenced by Italian neorealism as a school. But it's the same sort of filmography style. It's not my area of expertise at all, so I'm going to skip it as much as possible. Let's see, I got my hot water boiling, actually. Oh, it's really warm. It's a little painful, but that's fine. Stephen King's talking about different things, not just religious, demonic possession type things, or slashers. He goes more in depth. He talks about social political, I guess. He's talking about, I don't want to say what's scary because that's the name of his essay and that's just confusing. He's talking about how horror movies are broken up. That's not a helpful page. This is a helpful page. There we go. He's very broad in his horror movies as well. Oh, and we get to go into Stephen King's talking about TV shows. From Stephen King's talking about TV shows, I did research on. I was IMDbing. It's a verb. The shows he talked about to see what years they were in. So I'll talk about the 60s ones in the 60s video next time, and the 70s one in this video. And apparently the 70s ones have all been remade into 2000s ones, like Kolchak the Night Stalker. I didn't know that was remade. Apparently Dark Shadows, which is a Kolchak, same producer type guy, has been remade. So King goes over Kolchak. He enjoyed some of them. They started off good, but then again, you keep a series. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. How's it going? We are still continuing with history of horror. We are going back. Now that we are past the 80s, we can go to Danse Macabre, the original Danse Macabre. The bulk of the book, not just the essay "What's Scary" at the end, at the beginning of the book, but as the compliment to the book. I'm in the original. I have the other version in audiobook, as I've mentioned before. So we're into the 70s, or we're back to the 70s. Did 2010s, then the 2000s, 90s, 80s last time, and now we're back to the 70s. I'm still going to be using Josh Howard's video, this one here at the bottom, of course, as a framework for a lot of the stuff, because he does go over some of the stuff that King doesn't, and I appreciate that, and I do need all the history of horror help I can get. Even though I don't think it's a great video, but, that same could be said about mine. So, let's not. Movies. In the 70s, social political movies would be like The Exorcist, focusing on Regan, the little girl in The Exorcist who's possessed. Sort of a juvenile delinquency gone mad. So in the 70s, there's still fear of juvenile delinquency run amok. So I was like, how bad can you get? Well, here's The Exorcist for you. This is worse than it could get. The Brood by Cronenberg, which King calls this horror movie of the disintegration of the generational family. Isn't that a fancy term? I don't know. It's a little bit. Stephen King says these things are subtext, and they are. It's subtext that an average moviegoer can watch the movie and not pick up on at all, because the disintegration of the generational family. That's when I'm going in a horror movie, I'm not thinking too much about it. The Amityville Horror, he talks about